Welcome to Defending Digital. I'm Chad Warner. I'm pleased to have with me today Stephen Paulson of Fireball Approves, an identity verification service for scam prevention. The founder of Fireball Approves nearly fell victim to a scammer, and now the company is on a mission to save others from the headache and financial loss of scams. So, Stephen, today I'd like to learn more about the scams that are out there and how people can avoid them. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?
Absolutely, Chad. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to make your acquaintance. So yeah, absolutely. Let's go.
Great. So let's go back in time. Why did you start fighting scams in the first place?
Oh, this is a great story. And it's one of those where I was right and my sister was wrong. So I love telling it.
Yeah.
It's funny because we were doing this like family reunion type of summer vacation for and she says, okay, well, I'm going to, come your way to South Florida. We're going to end up in the Keys. I said, okay, great. So find a place. And, she's on Craigslist or whatever, and she finds this little vacation rental, and she's like, I got such a great deal. And, of course, being in South Florida, and, listening to the local news stations and, reading different articles that come across my desk being in real estate, I'm like, are you sure it's legit? Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I, paid the, got money going here or there. And I said, okay. And then I guess, of course, offline, I think she started to think about it, and she said, you know what, maybe this isn't right. So she starts going down the process, and sure enough, the person that she had been communicating with all of a sudden, starts kind of changing the rules on her. Hey, send the money here. That email's not, working right. And I think over time, she started to realize like, hey, this isn't right. So she, being the investigator that she is, she started to really dig deeper and start peeling back those layers. And sure enough, she found out that she was on the hook with a scammer. So that's kind of the origination of it. And of course, knowing Tammy, the fireball she is, she took it personal. Yeah. She said, okay, this happens. It's like a real thing. She starts looking online, seeing all the different articles and how people are getting hurt by these scams. And she took it personal, and she said, I'm going to start a business. I'm going to fight tooth and nail to protect consumers. I said, okay, let's go. So then here we are.
Yeah. All right. So what, now after the time in the business, what would you say are the most common scams that you deal with?
Vacation rental, student housing, type of things. That's probably the biggest challenge because, anytime there's kind of a new thing in the market, it ends up on sites all over the internet, and so that obviously has been probably the biggest one. Okay. And you're dealing with people that, could live in another country, like legitimately, live in another country. They just happen to be renting out, their house for the week that they're not living in Florida or whatever state they're from. So those are probably the most ripe for scammers.
Okay. Now, have you noticed that there are certain sites or apps that have scams more frequently? Are there certain apps or sites that you say stay away from those or be more suspicious on those? Or on the flip side, others that you say, those tend to be more safe. Any recommendations there?
I think that they're all prone to, scamming because a lot of times it's just a data entry mechanism of like, okay, here's the property, here's my information, and, reach out. Even the biggest guys out there, the biggest vacation rental services out there aren't always, in tune with who it is that's actually signing up for their service. So, Craigslist for sure I always call it the wild, wild west. Okay. Because anybody can put anything on there at any time. And there's nobody, that's the whole reason it's free, right? Because there's literally nobody behind the scenes doing any vetting or, doing anything. It's literally somebody who created a website and put whatever you want on there. So Craigslist is probably the, one that's the easiest to breed scammers, I guess you could call it.
Sure. Have you found that there are certain types of people that are more likely to be victims of scams or targeted for scams than others?
I wouldn't say that there's like a demographic that's more prone. I would say that everybody's prone. I would say the people that don't ask as many questions are probably the ones that are the most prone, taking things at face value. those are probably the people that are the most prone. I mean, you really have to go into these things. Vacation, I don't want to be the guy who says like, oh, vacation rentals are bad, or, anything's bad, because they're all great. I mean, some of this home sharing stuff is amazing. The question is, you got to go into it kind of with one eye open, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if it doesn't pass the sniff test as you're working your way through it, then something may be fishy. And usually your gut should always be trusted in that spot. And that would be my bit of advice for you. But
Yes.
you just have to be able to ask the right questions and kind of, like I said, pass that sniff test.
Yeah. So people who would be more trusting by nature, who aren't going to go, diving deeper, doing some additional research, asking those questions, those are the ones who, are more likely to fall prey, because they're not doing their due diligence to look into it.
I would say that's the most eloquent way of putting it. Absolutely.
Okay. And then you kind of started to hit on this, but what would be kind of the top red flags that a person would see, and that should cause them to start to suspect that, maybe this is a scam?
Sure. So for me, there's like two parts, right? If it's a national web service that's out there, a national website, if they want you to transact away from the platform, that's an absolute red flag. Now, Craigslist, it makes it a little more difficult, right? Because, the Craigslist world, that's the whole idea, is that you are operating offline.
Mm-hmm.
But if the ad says one thing, and the scammer's trying to get you to send money by PayPal before they let you see the property or stuff like that, those are probably the biggest red flags.
Okay.
Some of them anyway, off of Craigslist.
Yeah. So let's say that a person starts to see those red flags. They start to, suspect that maybe something is off. What should a person do when they realize that they may that they're being scammed? They're in the process.
Well, let's hope first of all they haven't sent any money yet, because that's you really need to make sure your I's are dotted and T's are crossed before any money changes. But I mean, that's where Fireball Approves kind of comes in, right? For a very, very nominal fee, you can have us use the proprietary system that we've created to verify ownership, right? To make sure that you are dealing with the person that you're supposed to be dealing with. And that's really the whole, that's everything behind the brand and what we're doing.
Yeah. So let's say that someone doesn't contact Fireball Approves. They don't do the additional research. They go all the way through. The scammer strings them along. They have paid. They maybe even show up at the property, and they realize, I've been taken. What do they do next? Who do they contact for help? Any advice for someone who's already been scammed?
There are stories all over the internet about, family A. They've gone through that whole process. They show up to the rental on their day, and they realize that, the house is just lived by regular people. This stuff happens every day. Unfortunately, you need to get the police involved, especially if there was money involved. You can also reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to kind of help you along the way. But once it reaches that point, it becomes very difficult to backtrack, right? That's why it's very important that you go in eyes wide open and do your best to prevent such an instance. And that's where Fireball Approves for $19. You can at least have some kind of modicum of probability that you're dealing with the true ownership, and you won't have any issues like that. Because once you go down that path, to climb out of it, it's borderline impossible. And the credit card companies are going to have very very limited to say, because you're probably doing a PayPal transaction. You're probably sending actual cash, and the person on the other side, once they take it, they're just going to close the account and open another one to do it to somebody else.
Sure.
So there's not a whole lot of downside risk for the person on the other end. But you as a potential customer, there's a ton of risk. You risk all whatever that down payment or deposit is.
Right. Definitely a situation where an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yep. My favorite saying.
Yeah. Would you say, you kind of mentioned the, PayPal or cash. would you say, are there any particular methods of payment that are safer to use than others in these types of transactions?
Um, Not in my experience. Maybe as a follow-up, Tammy can get and answer that question a little bit better. For me, the way that I look at it is, they're all great. It's just a matter of who's on the other end of the receiving end,
Sure.
They all try, but that's not their focus, right? I mean, we all do well when we stay in our lane and we do what we do well. The PayPals of the world and, Western Unions or whoever it is, they do great at sending money all over the world, but, maybe they're not as strong at, scam prevention and that sort of thing. And that's why we feel like there's a place for us in the market.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Do you think that it's necessary for people to follow the news on all the latest scams and kind of be tuned into that? Or really, is it enough to understand some of the principles behind scam avoidance?
I think they're kind of one and the same, really. You absolutely have to stay informed. That's why if you go to our, Facebook page, Fireball Approves or fireballapproves.com, you'll see, a lot of different stories and a lot of different articles that we publish there, because we want to educate. Part of our business model is that we educate the public and help prevent this stuff. I mean, even if it means that we're not, collecting a fee to help somebody out, for us, there's a little bit of advocacy built into our business model that is very important to us. And if you follow us online, you'll get a lot of more recent stories, because the reality is things change, right? Like, we get caught onto something, and then next thing you know, there's a pivot and the scammers are on to doing something else a little bit of a different way, right? So the best, fastest, easiest way to stay in tune with that stuff is to follow us, because that's what we do for, the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and often those stories can teach the principles, can illustrate the principles, right? You can give somebody a list of 10 tips for scam avoidance, and they may just forget it because it's just not memorable enough. Whereas, they hear a terrifying story of, someone who was scammed or was nearly scammed, and that's a lot more likely to, remain in the brain and
Sure.
and be
Resonates.
recalled the
Yeah.
next time. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. It resonates. If you kind of remember those deal stories, right? And then if you find yourself in a scam and you're like, wow, this same exact thing is happening to me that happened to that article I read about a month ago, right? And then that's kind of how they associate, what's happening to them. But look, I mean, we've all kind of moved on from the email scam where we've all got $8 million sitting in Africa somewhere in Cameroon. Yeah. It's all we got to do is send our personal information, right? We all know that now, right? Because we're all educated and we've been through that thing. We get it. And to be honest with you, the way scams are on the internet and everything else like that, it's important to have an advocate on your side that is kind of that buffer, between the bad guys and what you want to do, and, save a little money and go on vacation and have a relatively stress-free week.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, could you imagine the pain that somebody has to go through? Like, they may have sometimes a year or 2 years in advance have planned this big vacation to some exotic place, and then they show up, they get on the plane, they do the whole thing, and then it's not real.
Right.
I mean, that just blows my mind I can't fathom what that feeling would be like. And it almost happened to us, it's real. It's out there. It happens.
Right. Right. So let's say that someone listening is a parent and they want to be able to educate their kids to not be the victim, to not fall prey to these scams. What would be some things there? I mean, is it important that kids be tech savvy, or do parents need to be mostly just reinforcing, hey, be cautious, be skeptical? What would you say are the things that parents should be instilling in their kids so that they are able to defend themselves in light of scams?
How great would that be if Tommy the teenager comes and tells his parents, like, hey, I think that's a scam, mom and dad. I mean, why not? I remember as a kid, my number one thing, or the one thing my parents always told me every day, don't get hit by a car. Watch out for cars. Yeah. Right? What are we telling kids now? Like, we're telling them to be careful of fake profiles, catfishing, cyberbullying, scams, and just like so much more is on their plates these days. And obviously, a lot of it comes from that digital environment. But Yeah, I mean, they should absolutely be in tune, and that'll help them in the long run. They may very well go to college and have, a student housing issue. We had a one the other day where the guy reached out to us. There was a, one building ownership type situation, but then there was a sublease involved, and we needed to really verify to make sure that sublease was a real thing, and that they were indeed allowed to rent out for student housing, because at first glance, it just looks like a one single property owner. And then there's this outside third party that, is kind of involved. And we're like, okay, well, how does this fit together? Right. And so, that's the part where, as coming from a real estate background and my sister with investigative, it took a little time to match, connect the dots, but we were able to finally, give an approval for this student housing. And you think about student housing, the amount of commitment, for 6, 7, 8 months, whatever it is, the amount of deposits and that sort of thing, and the money involved in that transaction for a very low nominal $19 fee, you kind of take a little bit of the guesswork out, like, hey, am I doing the right thing? Now you're dealing with legit players. And, it was really, really a great option for this guy, and we approved it, and, on with their student housing they go.
Yeah, right. So how about on the opposite end of the age spectrum? So you've got, parents helping their kids and training them. But how about adults who are helping, say, elderly relatives or elderly friends? What should they be doing to help those elderly loved ones in their lives?
It just kind of depends on how tech savvy and, how they are. In some cases it may make sense to just, have somebody who is a little more tech savvy handle this stuff for them. In some cases they're more than capable of doing it all on their own. So, if they get too personal, or if they kind of steer away from the primary objective a little bit too much, and they're asking for social security numbers and this, that, and the other, and it's like not on a trusted platform. Clearly there's some cause for concern, and probably just better off just stepping back and saying, hey, let me look a little deeper into it, or let me call Fireball Approves, right? That would make things a whole lot easier. That's for sure.
Right. Regardless of age, right? If they contact you, they don't have to worry about how old they are or how familiar they are with technology or with these platforms. That's what you're there to help with.
Absolutely. The scenario could be, 10 different things, and it doesn't really matter with us as long as you have that Fire approved, email that we send to you, then you're dealing with the right ownership.
Mm-hmm. So you've observed a lot of online scams over the last few years, and now kind of looking back, does that make you optimistic or pessimistic about the future and people's ability to avoid online scams going forward?
Well, scams aren't going away. The question's going to be, are you going to get taken by one, or are you not? Mm-hmm. And so for me, that's the fun component in what we're doing, is the education, aspect of it, and trying to make sure that we're all kind of, there's a little bit of a herd mentality, right? So there's a ton of people out there all trying to get a little better deal on their vacation rental, or, whatever the case may be. Maybe there's something listed on a Craigslist that isn't listed elsewhere, right? Because maybe that owner doesn't want to pay the big fees of the larger thing. So he's doing it on Craigslist, but he's a private owner. He's completely legit. Sometimes they may even be pre-qualified for us to do business with, if they take the time to, go through our system. But, look, they're never going to go away. They're going to keep getting more and more complex. They are going to get probably for bigger dollars and bigger dollars over time. It's not going to go away. It's up to us and up to the consumer to really educate themselves on, the rights and wrongs of, some of these, new systems that are coming out.
Right. And like you mentioned earlier with, the kids and teenagers, it's just part of their life now is, they need to be prepared to know what to look out for. And anyone growing up, using technology is just going to need to have that as a kind of part of their culture and part of their makeup growing up is to watch out for those things.
Absolutely. Part of their DNA.
Yeah. So Fireball Approves does work in private investigations, kind of related to the scams, and then even outside of that. And that's probably taught you a few things about kind of digital security, privacy, even outside of simply avoiding scams. In those realms of kind of personal cybersecurity, online privacy, any advice that you want to share that would help people protect themselves online in general?
Um, yeah, I mean, Tammy, she is the private investigator, the licensed investigator. She may be able to circle back with the most appropriate answer to this. I'm more of kind of like the real estate guy,
Sure.
vacation rentals, that sort of thing. Um, as far as I'm concerned, from what my conversations with her, um, just be very protective of your information. I mean, you
Mhm.
can't just be giving anybody your addresses and social security numbers and account numbers and that sort of thing. Like, you really got to make sure that it's going through something legit. I mean,
Mhm.
you're not ever going to totally prevent something from happening, but you're trying to mitigate that risk
Right.
and reduce its likelihood.
Mhm.
Right. That's you're always managing that part of the
Yeah.
system, you
Yeah.
know.
Okay. Any other warnings or advice or encouragement that you'd like to share before we conclude?
Well, look, I mean, we all love to live a carefree life. We all, kind of want things to be kind of done, right? In most cases, we expect things to be done, but it's not always the case. And
Mhm.
so, Fireball Approves would love to get involved with, your vacation rentals or anything else that you feel like needs to be vetted or investigated in, to make sure that you're dealing with the right player. Um, like I said, we're very passionate about, um, you know, consumer advocacy and, making sure that people aren't getting taken advantage of. I mean, because
Mhm.
it almost happened to Tammy, and it made her upset, and she went on she started a business and to help fight for the right things, and
Yeah.
she gets all the credit in the world for going this far. Our job is to obviously educate the consumer at some level that this stuff does exist, and whether you hire us or not, we're not really going to worry ourselves with that. I mean, sure, we'd love to work for you, show you what we want to do, but at the same time, if you take our tips and tricks and use them for your own benefit, and it ultimately saves you time, money down the line, then we've still done our job, and it helps us sleep well at night knowing that the scammers didn't win. But
Yeah.
it's not going away, so
Right.
it's only going to change. It's only going to be worse over time. That's for sure.
Yeah. So now you mentioned earlier the Facebook page, the website. So for people who want to learn more about Fireball Approves, where can they find you online?
Facebook, Fireball Approves, fireballapproves.com. I mean, she's got all the other social media stuff too, the Twitters and whatnot as well, so she's definitely there as far as the social media, footprint. So, um, look, I mean, that's it. Just come onto our site, introduce yourself, contact me. You won't get bombarded with a ton of like sales stuff, and you're actually dealing with a human being, not an actual algorithm, which is another thing, right? I mean, that's all we do is we communicate with algorithms all day. I mean, even your phones anymore. I mean, you say something, that's the next ad you see, right? So
Yeah.
technology is just getting more and more advanced, and so with the scams, and we're here to help you. Whether we do a deal or not, it's important that you know what's going on out there.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So, Stephen, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today. Again, this is Stephen Paulson of Fireball Approves, an identity verification service which helps prevent scams. And I'm Chad Warner of Defending Digital, teaching you to defend your digital life. Have a great day, Stephen.
Thank you. Appreciate the time, Chad.